Welcome to the Better Two podcast. I'm your host, Donna. Today's guest is William Covert, and William has a new record coming out called Dream Vessel. We talk about math rock, post rock, and more. So tune in. Come Out of the Shadows is D.M. Needham's latest novella. World-famous singer Grace Fillmore catches the attention of many admirers. However, one individual will go to extreme measures to possess her. With the stalker situation intensifying, Grace's record label enlists bodyguard Dylan Roberts for her protection. As Dylan takes on the role of safeguarding Grace, she notices something she desires, but so does Dylan. Can Dylan stop the threat, or will their attraction become a distraction that jeopardizes everything? Come Out of the Shadows is available on Amazon.com. Hi, William. How you doing today?
I'm good, Donna. It's good to be here. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. So you are based in Chicago, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, I say that in Chicago. I haven't lived in Chicago proper since 95, 96, but I live way out in the burbs, way out in the
Okay.
burbs. So you're releasing a new record on the 17th, and tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. My new solo record is called Dream Vessel. Um, Recorded it last year. Been kind of slowly putting out some singles through the summer, and yeah, really, to me, I view it very much as a Chicago record. Just in terms of, for me, I've been in Chicago for about 16 years. I came here originally as a musician, playing music, grew up in West Michigan, and it was like, coming of the age out of college, it's like, well, New York, LA, Chicago, and Chicago is just kind of like made the most sense. Already knew a bunch of people here. And yeah, kind of my solo material on Dream Vessels very much influenced really by musicians I know in Chicago, the kind of the music culture here. It's something before I moved to Chicago, I never thought I didn't really even know what the whole like post rock genre, as it's known, of like all this different instrumental subgenres and how much of history was here, and kind of went knee deep into it after discovering it, being here a couple of years, and now it's at the point where it's a kind of just a huge part of my musical language. And I think if it wasn't done here, it would be like music output would probably sound very different as it was before I was living in Chicago. So yeah, so Dream Vessel, it's really it's a totally improvised album, which is something else that kind of taking a lot from like the Chicago underground music that really started here in like the late 80s, early 90s, and kind of taking that influence and just kind of modernizing it a bit for 2025. I have some brave souls, some friends of mine from the music scene here who I kind of recruited in. We played in some bands together, and I kind of wanted, the whole idea of this album was catching everything in the moment as it happens. I'd done a few solo albums at this point. My first solo album came out in 2019, and I think for me, I was doing a lot of these things. I'm a drummer primarily, so doing as a drummer, kind of like a lead instrument in a solo project, it's not something you see a lot, and ways of trying to keep that fresh. I've been playing a lot by myself the past several years, kind of like messing around with synthesizers and looping things, and really try to establish it as kind of live drummer. Everything else is kind of sampled out, sequenced, and things like that. And I felt like I could kind of push that to a point where I was like, okay, kind of interested in doing something a little different. I was kind of leaning into a lot of the really interesting kind of improv and like underground music that's here in Chicago, and trying to tap into some of that that I'm seeing in the scene. So got some good friends of mine, Jack McKevitt and Nate Shank, who are great musicians in their own right, and kind of just approached them like, hey, we're just going to go to the studio with the studio time. We're not going to rehearse anything. If you want to talk about ideas, okay, that's fine. But it was kind of like, let's see if we can just do this in a way where we can get an album's worth of material that we feel good about, and just kind of seeing what like the creative spark generates. So that was kind of the impetus of the whole album. And even the title, like Dream Vessel, a lot of the song titles and things like that coming out of almost like Jungian psychology, tapping into that like subconscious, creative, collective subconscious, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's kind of like at the core, just kind of what the album kind of experimenting with musically.
Well, and I wanted to comment that, I've been doing a lot of podcasts. I've done 200 and something podcasts already, and I play bass, but I've never heard terms of noise rock, math rock, or post rock. So that was all kind of new in the press release. I'm like, because I don't think people refer necessarily, the general public refer to that as that. Those terms are kind of, I mean, I know who Husker Du is, and I know some of the artists that made it, but I would not have labeled them that.
Yeah, so I will say in my kind of my life outside of playing music, I come out of music academia. I got a history degree, studying contemporary music, Ferris State University's Liberal Arts College in Michigan, and how I kind of came upon this whole like noise rock, math rock, post rock. There's all these kind of like interchangeable terms, and it's like, well, what does that really like? Noise rock always reminds me of a term like art rock. Like, well, what does that really mean
Right.
when talking about a certain kind of music or anything like that? And I got really into, almost obsessed to the point of this kind of history that exists in Chicago for this kind of like stylized version of really like non-contemporary rock music, is kind of the most general way to put it. And I've written several articles on the history of math rock. There's a music publication website called Fucking Bahamas. I co-wrote a 4-part series out of where we kind of really deep dive into this. And it's really an interesting thing to me the more I kind of delved into math rock, noise rock, this kind of thing, because it's very kind of centralized. Well, I would almost describe it as soccer. You can find math rock bands kind of all over the world now, but it was originally this thing that was really centralized in Chicago and kind of came about the same time in the early 90s. Most people know at least the name Nirvana. Like when the
Hmm.
whole grunge movement was happening, you had all these, popular bands coming out of Seattle, and the frontmen of these bands, whether there's Chris Cornell, Soundgarden, Eddie Vedder, Pearl Jam, kind of the faces of the scene, that was kind of like the grunge movement. And you had a bunch of musicians in Chicago who kind of in an effort to be like, what is the opposite of this? What is the opposite of like these larger than life kind of celebrity fronted band figures that was happening? So you had one of the first bands, this band called Tortoise, that came about 1990, and they originally started the idea of like, well, we all play different instruments. So what if there's no front man and we're just all changing instruments between songs, and there's no lead singer? So that way there's no idea of like band leader. So it's tapping almost a bit more into kind of like an Ornette Coleman bebop jazz kind of mindset, where it's like, all right, no one's kind of leading the band. We're all working together. This is kind of like the music's this collaborative kind of moving thing that's happening when we perform it. And out of that, there was a handful I could name as they have these kind of like small underground bands that were coming out of Chicago, and then people are trying to label, well, what is it? Well, what is it? Noise math or noise rock and math rock, excuse me, are both terms that were originally kind of labeled as jokes
Okay.
on the music. The term math rock specifically was first used for a band called Chavez, who were around in the mid 90s, where literally a friend of the band who just thought their music was just like way too complicated and complex would literally bring a calculator to their shows. And instead of clapping between songs, he would like type out things on the calculator and hold it up, and literally like called the math rock. And it was a total joke. But then it's like one of those things in the context the band knew, and it was like a total inside joke, but word of mouth spread. And I think by the early or the mid 90s, Rolling Stone had used it in an article. And then now this term stuck.
Hmm.
And Chavez and a handful of bands doing this kind of like a lot of it primarily instrumental, or when they do have vocals, just kind of like a bit more subdued and really focused on the music. And they're trying to be this like kind of anti-capitalist, anti-grunge thing. But then that scene kind of got associated with Chicago. So by the time people like me in the 2000s are coming up, early days of the internet, the only thing you could find about these kinds of genres and things like that all kind of pointed back to Chicago. Bands like Tortoise, there's another band called Slint, who was originally out of Louisville, but was in Chicago for several years, and they did something even totally different, where instead of the kind of popular screamy vocal style of grunge at the time, they were doing spoken word.
Okay.
And so it's like they have a song called Good Morning Captain, where all the verses is just like a narrative, and it's all of like Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, just tying in all these like old British literature themes. So even lyrically, a lot of what these bands were doing was just very different than what was happening in like contemporary, popular rock music. So then people are like, well, what is this stuff? What do you call this stuff? So noise rock is another term that kind of got latched onto it, I think primarily by journalists who were like, this is way too loud and heavy to be jazz. And then like jazz people who are like, a lot of it might be improvised or it might be instrumental, but this is like still way too rockin' to be jazz. And rock people, I think it was still too experimental for them to be like, yeah, I'm going to listen to this after a Nirvana record. So it kind of like just existed this weird kind of scene. And then through the internet, and really even, I feel like those genres are probably more popular now than ever. It's kind of interesting during COVID, just the explosion of some of these bands who hadn't played shows for like 30 years, all of a sudden now are having these huge online followings. And, one does like a reunion tour that does well, and now another one does. And all of a sudden it's kind of like almost almost like a second coming for that kind of genre. So that was something too, where in my music, I'm still really interested in what they were doing 30 years ago and how that scene even kind of existed. Chicago is also a really interesting city compared to a lot of other music cities like New York or LA, because there's no music industry here, and
Right.
there's no history of that either. So it's kind of like, if you're coming to Chicago, and especially if you're trying to play this off the wall instrumental music, it's kind of like you kind of have to know what you're signing up for. So then the people in the scene and the people going to these shows are like just so generally interested in this kind of music and where it can go. So I think for me, that was just like a huge kind of inspiration to kind of delve myself into, I never thought I would have been doing like a fully improv, whatever genre you want to call it, kind of music thing. And it just kind of took hold. Because the other thing too, for me, I also played drums in like 6 other bands in Chicago, ranging from, kind of like punk bands to like 90s indie rock stuff. So this to me too has always kind of been like a holding cell for like, all right, where are the really interesting, maybe too weird ideas for my other bands doing, a bit more conventional rock stuff, and kind of can kind of simmer here. And I feel like I don't really have a rush to do anything with it either, because playing with so many bands, it's always staying busy. So, and that way too, it's kept it fresh, because it's like I can come back to it when I want to. And now even when we recorded this album, I brought my friends Nate and Jack in. I thought it'd be cool to do some live improv in the studio. And it's kind of like, we'll just see what happens. And now it's at the point where it's become a live band as well. We did our first live show in Chicago. We're doing a record release. It's going to be a full band. And that's also been an interesting experiment, where we've even been like, well, do we keep it improv? Do we try to backwards learn any of that material? And it's almost going from like improv to making it more of a written kind of thing. Or is it like, no, we're just going to keep it off the cuff and kind of just and keep going with it. So it's even in that sense, it's like still this kind of evolving project. And yeah, we're actually going back into the studio in October to record whatever the follow-up to Dream Vessel ends up being. So
Wow. So you brought up something that's interesting, because you talk about grunge and corporation, and that bands wanted to be anti-corporate. And when you think about grunge was supposed to be this whole anti-establishment thing. But yes, it became this big money juggernaut.
I know it's so funny. And I think it's also like such an interesting comparison, or laying the groundwork too of so much of like how social media has influenced what you've seen, like popular, not just rock, kind of any genre, where almost anything that becomes popular from the fringes just gets monetized and kind of corporatized until it can be, kind of just like an easily consumable thing. And I think in Chicago too, a lot of these bands, right, the criticism was with grunge as it became more and more of a commodity. By like the mid 90s, you had like fashion shows where the models are in the like flannel and ripped jeans, and just where the everything out of grunge just got squeezed into maximum profitability, and so that's kind of also I think a part of that narrative too, where it's like we're gonna do what we want musically, and almost to a fault, where we're going to experiment with stuff where there's like really no way to make money off of this. Like it almost can't be commoditized, because there's like, how do you turn, jazz, freeform, noisy rock stuff into some kind of corporate consumable product. So it's kind of, I think also when I first moved to Chicago, that was kind of almost an endearing thing of seeing all these people kind of laboring in this music scene where the ceiling of people you're going to reach is probably pretty low, yet still going forth and just kind of like doing what you're wanting to do anyway.
Yeah. I had a friend, a roommate at the time. She was in a band called World Class Noise, and this was the mid 90s, and it was a big band. They had horns and everything, and they played a lot of covers, and they had some originals. But they were always out there doing it, and they played some big gigs like Taste of Chicago and whatnot. But there was always the hustle, and there's always the hope that you're going to get somewhere. And it's like I think with Spotify and things of that nature, it's changed a little bit because your music gets out there more, but you're not making any money.
Right.
I mean, it's an amazing thing that we have the technology to open the door for us to. There's no gatekeeper per se. But then now, as we've progressed with technology, you have AI who's now getting a recording contract, even though it can't be copywritten, and who's actually getting the money. But there's a woman who she signed a record deal, and she writes lyrics, and she's used AI to make the music.
Yeah, I mean, so much of it too is kind of, it's almost not surprising kind of where the music industry has ended up. Like I can remember when like Napster first came out, and people were just blown away. The idea of you could just like download a song, even though this is the old dial-up days, and you're like start stuff and you're waiting like 8 hours to download one song overnight. Like it was crazy the lengths that people would do to pirate stuff back then, where I think people today would be like, you waited how long to like get one song? It's so crazy.
Well, let's be honest, just getting on the internet back then was like, okay, maybe it's going to dial up, maybe I won't get a busy signal, and maybe the next, it's going to go to the next one, and you're taking a half hour to an hour sometimes to get online.
Right.
Didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean it's those are the real Wild West days of the internet. And but I think though, like what you see now with AI use in music, especially in the songwriting part, it's kind of like just kind of reinforces, I think, as like working musicians, just still like the most profitable thing working musicians can do, if you're in a position where you can go out and do it, is play shows, right? It's still like most, selling your own merch at a show is still like the best deal as a musician you're going to get.
Yeah.
And I think too, I think in an interesting way what the streaming is doing, allowing the music to get out there. And also I think at this point, no one really expects to make any money at it. Is it allows to be like, you know what, you can take kind of your wildest idea and throw it at the wall. I think it's kind of changing the way people perceive maybe what like fame or like, making it quote unquote really is or means, or so much of the rules are kind of like, it just feels, especially since COVID, are getting reestablished in music. And I think you're seeing it too, of how many people, they start online, they get big, they go viral, they build a following, and it's like, what's the first thing that they do? Other than they go on tour. It's like still that tour model just seems like the most profitable thing out there, even though it's still like, even that is still it's still difficult to make money at all, because even on a tour model, if you're band booking I just got off tour. It's like when you're booking your own shows, you're still, usually playing for door deals and then doing your own marketing, and it still adds up with the amount of personal time that you're putting in to try to get anything out of it. But that's still better than streaming, and I think there's the fulfillment side is still kind of there too, more than, it's great to see like some of those stats, but it's also kind of weird because it's like not seeing someone physically listen to your music still makes it seem like it's just kind of out there in the void.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have, I have a PR person that he's worked with Britney Spears. He's worked with a lot of different bigger names. And he's like, fandom doesn't exist anymore, really. I mean, before it was a big deal. And yeah, Taylor Swift and Lady Gaga. And yes, I know there are some people that have fandom, but it's not the same. Now it's like, oh, this is a great song. It's awesome. I love it. Oh, oh, look at that bright shiny object over there. I'm going to go listen to that now. And it's like we constantly, because of the instant gratification, move on, move on.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're putting on a new record and you're turning around and recording another one right off the bat. So you're constantly having to fund yourself to either do tours or to record again, and you're constantly having to produce more and more.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And I think it's something too where, I think musicians are kind of learning the flexibility, or how flexible you need to be with it, because an interesting thing too of like for me playing in multiple bands, multiple projects, I'm in bands, we're using different PR people, we're doing different marketing strategy. So then it's like you also get this weird perspective of seeing things that work or don't work or why. And it's definitely, yeah, like that. For me, I'm putting this record out. We're going to the studio right away because it is a kind of thing of like, but the playlists and things like that, the algorithm, it's like you got to keep putting it out there. And I'm not going to call it content because music is way better than content, but you got to like keep putting the stuff out there. So then it's like, okay, if this is how the rules are, how the game is played now, then it's just trying to like be flexible to go with that stuff as well as you can, and yeah, it's definitely feeling like it's just an interesting time for music in terms of like so many of these like old models for like PR and that kind of stuff either is kind of going away. I think going viral just kind of just shook everything about how you can get found and what that means, and how much, how many of these, like I see young artists too, like Gen Z and that coming out where, they're just doing it all themselves, all online. And the idea of the exterior of using like marketing or PR people, or, even something like a show poster just seems like so foreign because they're just so used to the phone and doing it all online, social media. And, so it's just like this interesting kind of generational change that's happening in real time.
Mm-hmm.
And, so it sometimes it's like, it's also the kind of thing where it's like, well, this is how we used to do it. Well, it's like, well, this is how I booked shows 20 years ago. And it's like, still like, well, some of that still is true, but a lot of that is also just changing or already has changed too. So it's like trying to keep up with everything. And it's, so hard in the social media too. It's like, right, people are posting stuff all the time. New music is coming out all the time. I think for me, I kind of had to put like blinders on of like, I'm focusing on my own music and my own projects, and I gotta like stop scrolling all the time. It's the kind of thing. Always trying to see what other people are doing or bands are promoting. It's like, nope. It's like you gotta focus on your own stuff on your own time too. And I think like that's also been a challenge for a lot of like musicians and bands of how to approach that online engagement, like how much engagement you're supposed to do, when's too much, like how you really know when it's working, and that kind of thing. So it's yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, for me too with like this solo stuff, that's where I'm like, okay, what of my bands has worked or hasn't worked, and let's just do that. So it was like, even I released an EP this summer in July, and kind of just scheduled it on purpose, like going to release the EP, do a couple singles, and then pretty much as soon as that was out, it was like, nope, here is the full length coming out in October. So it's, for me, I've been putting out probably at least one new song of music for like the past 5 months, kind of leading up to the full length coming out in October. So just kind of trying to, just, and then for me, it's like I hadn't really done that approach before. I've usually been a bit more selective, maybe one single here, or if you're gonna have multiple releases, space them out. And I was just like, no, I'm just gonna throw the kitchen sink at it and just kind of see what happens.
Did that strategy work for you?
What's interesting is, I think it worked in terms of like, looking at like streaming numbers and things like that. Like, yeah, it's like I saw my stats go up, or just seeing like getting added to playlists on like Spotify and that. Now, depends what your metric is or what your goal is. But yeah, to me, it was like apparent, very obvious that it worked in terms of, I was just seeing my followers go up, both on, streaming accounts, and then that trickling over to social media. Now I'm getting more social media engagement. So definitely had a positive effect. Like each single, it's like just like the numbers out of the gate, and like, playlists they're getting added on increase. I'm like, oh, I wish, it's the kind of thing where it's like, I wish I had more music ready to go right now and just kind of like keep it going. So it's also can see where people kind of get almost like addicted in that way too, because then you constantly, it's like you see the numbers go up and it's like, oh, now I got to put more up. Oh, well, that was, now I got to do more. And just so in a way it's almost positive though, because it's like, that's why we're going back to the studio in October. It's like, okay, we got to get more music out as quickly as we can. As quickly as we can while still doing it how we want.
Right.
Not rushing it. This is like that kind of thing too. But my previous solo album came out 3 years ago. And that was like, I probably spent about 2 years working on that. Started during the pandemic. Like everyone sitting at home, I went down like a rabbit hole getting the like modular synthesizers, and I like built out the synthesizer rig, and took a long, was very happy with the result, but was like really took a long time until I was happy with the music with it. And, did good when it came out, but like the splash hit right when the album came out and then kind of rippled after that. So like comparing that to this approach, it's like, oh yeah, definitely the more music you can get out there. And I think just coming in, it's the thing too, no musician wants to focus on the marketing, but it's like, man, just coming in with more of a marketing strategy of how and when you're going to release music, unfortunately, is like necessary, I think, to kind of like, I don't want to say trick the algorithm, but get on the algorithm's radar where your stuff is actually getting promoted out there, so yeah, we're hoping to get more music out hopefully by early next year, because it's just kind of just seems like the nature of the beast these days is like how quickly can you get out as much music as possible.
Oh yeah.
But and the flip, if it's actually reaching people and getting there, then it's like, all right, I can do that. I keep making music. So
it gives you a reason to do it. I mean, you enjoy it, but you actually know that somebody's listening. So what was the first instrument you picked up?
I very vaguely played piano as a child. My mom was a pianist. My mom was a pianist. My dad was a clarinet player, which you don't see a lot of. So music was kind of always around as a kid. So my earliest memories was actually watching my mom play piano when maybe I was around 4 years old. And just kind of, she would play piano and I would kind of just like sneak in the room so she wouldn't see me and just kind of like sit there and watch it. And I think the rhythm aspect of piano was something that just kind of grabbed me immediately. Immediately just as a kid, then just hitting on things, trying to play the rhythm on the floor, trying to match all that. So then, it's like, well, I wanted to play music too. And it's like, well, we already had a piano in the house. So then ipso facto, now my mom is also my piano teacher, which looking back on that, I probably could have handled it a little differently, but it just kind of immediately made it not fun anymore when it was like, when mom's also the teacher. So I didn't stick with piano super long. I was pretty rebellious about it. And then, but I like was still doing this rhythm thing. So then it was like in 5th grade, you could sign up for band. And my parents were basically like, all right, you're doing it. You got to play something. You at least got to try band. So I will say they were super encouraging for me just to get involved. They're like, all right, if piano's not your thing, like you got to, what else is there out there? And started playing drums. I still wasn't really sure exactly what I wanted to do, but like the rhythm thing. So I was like, okay, maybe that's it. And played drums for about a year, and I felt almost kind of over it. I just felt almost ready to move on. I was like, okay, I did it. I think for me, part of the frustration was playing in a band. I was like, no, I'm into this rock music stuff. This isn't really doing it for me. And I was about ready to quit. And kind of unbeknownst to me, my band teacher at the time, I think kind of could tell I was like not really into this anymore, and kind of behind my back went to my parents and were like, he's got a lot of talent on drums. Like, don't let him quit. Like, what can we do to keep him interested still, basically? So then I ended up getting a drum kit, which was I was lucky enough to have parents who actually were like, yeah, okay, let's keep them interested. And my dad went out and bought me a drum kit, and then that was like the real game changer.
Nice.
And I also grew up in rural Michigan. My high school graduating class was 45 people. So super small school. There wasn't much else to do. So really by the time I was playing drums, then it was just like pretty much the thing I did all the time. And it was kind of interesting too, because there just weren't even that many people at my school who played instruments at all, because we were so small. So I didn't even join my first band until I was about a junior, not out of lack of trying, just out of finding finding a bassist, a guitarist, and like a singer. It was pretty funny. But then, yeah, my house growing up, was always then like the band hangout place. I was a drummer, so it's like we practiced at my house. My parents were cool with it. I think they were just like in the mindset of like, if you're here making a racket or whatever, not racket, but if you guys are here just jamming out, we know where you are, we know what you're doing. So they were just like, yeah, you want to have band practice, do this, do that. So they were always super supportive of the music, which then, by the time I was going to college, it just seemed to me, I'm like, well, this is what I'm doing. There was just no other option, or it wasn't anything that I thought was like, oh, this is a hobby and I'm going to go get a business degree or something. So then I just, never let go. I did, after my sophomore year of college, I was originally a music performance major. And after studying, I was a marimba player, actually. Funny story, because I was talking about this recently with my girlfriend, and she was like, why did you pick marimba as a drummer? And I'm like, I kind of don't remember. Maybe it was a challenge, I don't know. But after 2 years of pretty much studying exclusively marimba in college, I was like, okay, maybe I need to change my path a little bit, and went down a music history route, which I'm still doing today as well. So good change of events. But so early, really, drums, I started playing maybe around 12. I had a drum set by 14, and that was kind of it from there.
Who was your biggest influence as far as who did you aspire to be when you thought about drumming? Who did you aspire to be?
Oh man. So that changed. I can remember it in high school, kind of the evolution there. The first drummer that I was really into was Keith Moon of The Who. And I can remember the moment, actually. I was in 8th grade. It was right before I got an actual drum set. And my dad was watching. Grew up in the country, we didn't have cable. So he was just like watching whatever was on like PBS, and it was like this documentary about the history of rock and roll. And like when I joined it, like just where they were at in it was showing video footage from the Monterey Pop Festival of 1967. And they're showing clips of The Who. And I had never heard of this band. And at the time, I didn't even know what year Monterey Pop Festival happened. I could tell that it was old.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, this music is like just as loud and heavy and rocking. And I'm like, wow, this sounds exactly like the music I'm already listening to. But this came out like, what, 30 years ago? I was just kind of immediately blown by that. And then after The Who, they showed Hendrix with Mitch Mitchell on drums. So it's immediately seeing these videos, these guys who are like animals on the drum kit, going crazy. I was like, wow, that's okay. That's kind of interesting. I hadn't thought of drums in that kind of like bombast of way where it's kind of like you're just kind of expressing yourself in this way that I don't know, it's kind of blew me away. So Keith Wu was my original kind of like big drum influence, and his drum parts too were just so crazy. You know, I was listening to a lot of like alternative, you know, Q101 was the big radio station back in the day.
Yeah.
And even where I grew up in West Michigan, we got all the Chicago radio and TV stations, not Detroit. So it was Q101 radio, Top 9 at 9. That was like a big thing. The other big station, you know, you had 97.9 The Loop, Rock 103.5, The Bear, which is like where Mancow originally started. Now I'm like really dating myself, but
no,
like,
you're fine. I was thinking Mancow myself. So
yeah, you know, so like listening to a lot of that radio, and I saw these videos from these guys in like the 60s where I'm like, wow, this is like, you know, it's like I wouldn't tell my dad, but like this is still pretty rocking. So that immediately kind of influenced me of like, all right, how did drums get from there to where they were today? So Keith Moon was a big one, and then Billy Cobham was another really big drum influence for me. My uncle was a bass player, and when I first got into drums, he was a big jazz guy, and he was like pushing all this jazz stuff on me, you know. And it's like, yeah, you know, you gotta listen to these jazz drummers, you gotta listen to jazz. And I'm like 16, and I'm like, jazz is not cool. I don't care. Like, I'm sorry. Like, and then he had his record by this band called the Mahavishnu Orchestra. I had never heard of jazz fusion before. Couldn't tell what that meant. I'm like, this band's called an orchestra. There's a picture of like 5 of them in the front. I'm like, I don't even understand this band name. And then I heard it, and I was like, this is jazz. It was just the most off the wall kind of stuff at the time that I had heard. And the drums are like a machine gun. The guy is drumming 60 miles an hour, full blast. He's got like this double bass stuff going, but then this is still under the context of jazz or whatever. So that originally got me more interested in kind of the path of what is jazz? Okay, maybe I'm more interested in this stuff. But also I was like, who is this drummer guy? It's Billy Cobham. And then, you know, going through that way got me into, I was like, well, what else has he done? So it was like listening to like Miles Davis records he played on and all these different groups. So kind of like, that was probably when I was about 16 and kind of originally got this jazz itch going for me, which grew a little bit more in college, but really didn't come into fruition until I came to Chicago. And then it was like going to these venues and going to these shows where these guys were doing all this stuff where I'm like, oh, this kind of sounds like those old Mahavishnu record albums my uncle had, but oh, they're like doing it in this different way. And I was coming from music scene in Grand Rapids, where it's like you're aware of Chicago. It's not that far away. You know the big bands, but then living here and coming to local shows and just seeing stuff that was just like so off the wall, where it's like, wow, it just kind of changed my, I don't want to say focus so much, but just kind of view of everything. And so Billy Cobham was always kind of like a big influence for me in terms of played a lot of like off the wall music, but played these drum parts in ways that it's like you didn't really need to be a jazz fusion fan to be like, that guy's killing it on drums kind of thing. So that was something for me too, where I guess being almost like multi genre ish in a way within one scope of a band with something that really interested me. Whereas for me now, it's like I do play in like 6 different bands, but it's also like they're each doing their own thing. Yeah, Billy Cobham was a big influence for me in like not getting pigeonholed into one style, like being able to jump around to all this stuff. Another guy I'd say there's Terry Bozzio, who played with Frank Zappa, most
Missing
famously,
persons.
and Missing Persons. Yeah, and just like Frank Zappa was one I got introduced when I was in college, by a drum teacher actually. Frank Zappa has a very famous song called "The Black Pages," where he was specifically written of like a drummer's worst nightmare is you have to sight read a sheet of music and there's so many notes that the page is black. And I got introduced to that in college, and we're doing all this like classical music stuff, and I just thought this was another contemporary classical kind of piece. And it's like, no, it's Frank Zappa. You know who Frank Zappa is? It's like, this is rock and roll. It's like, what? And then I'm like, who's the drummer playing on this? It's Terry Bozzio. So that was and then getting into Missing Persons, all the stuff he did in the 80s, where it's like, wow, just like his ability to do all these different things on drums. Super complex, but also pocket stuff, very simple beats. So that was kind of a big influence on me too. It's like, always be like Bozzio. What would Bozzio do? He's also a really great melodic drummer. His drum parts, I've seen enough interviews where he talked about with Zappa, where a lot of the drum fills and stuff would be when a vocal thing would be happening. So that was something that to this day kind of still influences me when playing in some of my vocal-led rock bands, is matching fills to vocals rather than like just doing a fill because you're at the end of a bar or something. Because when it's tight and you do it right, it's like, man, it's just it makes sense in the way. Another thing I had heard once about playing in odd time signatures that kind of stuck with me. This goes along with something Terry Bozzio would say is, it's not normal to play in 4/4, and the reason being is you don't talk in 4/4.
No, you don't.
So it's like drums really make the most sense to be played rhythmically with language, and that was like a huge, just kind of like what mind blower that has always stayed with me too, and still when doing fills and that kind of stuff, I kind of go back to. And then so that's kind of some of the bigger influences from like a drum perspective. But I feel like there's so many drummers out today where it's almost, there's so many like amazing drummers posting like social media content where it's like they're not even like playing in bands per se. Like there's a channel called Drumeo where they just get these guys in there, and it's great. Like if you were a new drummer today, it's so great because there's so much educational material. Or it's just guys just breaking down these super complex drum pieces and drum parts and all that. And they all have like their own fan bases. It's almost like a completely different world. So I'm always interested too in seeing like all the new drummers coming up today that are just doing like really amazing stuff and kind of taking a lot of that old school influence and just doing different things with it. What's his name? Grayson Newt Rockman. He's the drummer. He got like viral online doing this kind of thing where he was breaking down, doing like Buddy Rich, like jazz videos, which you don't see like a 22-year-old guy doing that a lot. So he kind of became famous for doing these old jazz videos. And now he's started playing with all these bands. I think I just saw he had done like a gig with the Beach Boys and he's taken this viral fame and just took it to like an actual like gigging profession. So I'm also just kind of interested in seeing how drummers are finding new ways to kind of like get into the business and kind of like establishing themselves online. And I think that is also like a really kind of motivational thing that's happening with just drumming in general in social media.
What other instruments do you really like to play besides drums?
Oh man, too many. So I played guitar for about almost 25 years. I started that not too long after I started playing drums. Really took a couple years of classical guitar, but then was the kind of thing of I played guitar in some bands when I was in Michigan before I moved to Chicago. But once I got to Chicago, I was kind of like, all right, I kind of got to pick what I'm going to focus on here. And most people, once they see me play drums, or I was originally doing session work when I moved to Chicago. So I was getting a lot of session gigs. So once I was kind of established as a drummer, I was like, I'm just gonna lean into this as far as I can take it. So actually, the first record that I played guitar on in about 20 years has been this new solo record,
Yeah.
Dream Vessel. We're coming out of doing the solo. I think for me, because besides guitar, I did go back as an adult and play to learn piano again, and I took lessons in college. And like I said, during COVID, I started building like a modular synth rig and went really down like analog synth. And I have a whole collection of synths in my apartment. It kind of took over my office room. So as another one, when I was originally doing this solo project, I was like, okay, I'm established as a drummer. Drummer's the primary instrument here. My brain is thinking drum stuff all the time. But I didn't want it to be like a solo thing where I'm just going up and just doing drums. I'd seen drummers do that. I mean, you got to be really, 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 really good. Just hold a room with just drums. So I was like, I don't want it to be just that. I want it to be something else. And I had written some songs for some other bands I had played in, but I had a lot of stuff compositionally originally that I had been just sitting on for a long time. And it was like, well, maybe this is a good avenue to do that. So I did a couple albums that was mostly just me on drums and an array of like synthesizer and keyboards. And then I started incorporating guitar where I would, get like a keyboard sequence going almost as like a bass line and then play a guitar melody on top and loop it and then add drums as the last thing. So then the drums are kind of playing along to like these sequence bass lines and like these guitar melodies. And then using a pedal board to, mess with the loops to either cut them down to halftime or reverse or mess with key change on the pedal for the guitar. So then just trying to keep it like an organic thing. I kind of viewed it as like the guitar and the synths. It's almost like an additional band member where I'm playing live because it's like once you get these loops going and now you're plugging in the loop pedals and you're trying to change stuff with your feet while you're playing drums, it's like, so hopefully things happen how you want them to happen. They usually do, but there's always that element of like, well, I'm not exactly sure what is about to happen, what sounds are about to come out. And that was something that interests me with synths specifically. Is like a lot of these old analog synths where you don't have presets and like with modular synthesizers, how it's almost impossible sometimes to get the same sound twice. So that was originally where I was like, oh, it's almost like improv because I'm playing the same thing every time, but getting this totally different total kind of structure. And I think doing that for a while, I was like, okay, now I want to expand upon that more. And then after doing that for a couple years where I was gigging and touring by myself doing all this, I kind of felt like, well, the best way to kind of like up the ante is incorporating more people in on this. Like how much more chaos can I add with these synths and things? And that's where we're currently calling it the William Covert Trio. Might get renamed as the band in itself, but yeah, the trio is who plays on half of the new album, Dream Vessel, and it's also like kind of my live band. And I'm still using like the synths and guitar and stuff, and so we're still incorporating all of that and just kind of seeing where we can push it. But yeah, so for besides drums, the solo project has served for me to kind of get out that outlet of like, all right, I've been got all these guitar parts I've been writing for years and all these synth things and just giving that an outlet too, just to get out there.
And that's a good thing because I mean, you get to experiment, you get to show your creative side. You're not following a norm, you're doing your own thing, and that's a gift.
Yeah, I appreciate really just also like the people that have been into it that have kind of kept me going to the point where now it feels more of a sustainable. I would say before it felt more like a side project compared to my other bands, and now I would say it's kind of online with the other bands in terms of priority and fan base and where the reach the new album has gotten. I'm not complaining at all, and hopefully just trying to push it further. So yeah, it's been great, and I feel very, very lucky. I have a lot of friends too who play multiple instruments or trying to do different things, and a lot of times it's hard enough just being in like one band or one project and keeping that going and sustainable and focused on. So to be able to do all these different bands and still be able to focus on the solo stuff and find like an appreciative audience for it is I don't take it for granted at all.
I'm sure not. I am sure not. So, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to add?
Boy, we covered a lot of ground there. I think, yeah, we really touched on most everything I was kind of thinking of leading up for the album coming out, and just kind of the background of it. And depending where listeners are, if you got any listeners in the Chicagoland area, the record release show for Dream Vessel is October 16th at Reggie's Rock Club. And then the album comes out on the 17th. It's available anywhere you can stream music, physical copies, shirts, all that merch is on my Bandcamp, which is just williamcovert.bandcamp.com. I'm on social media. People want to follow me there, or interested in checking out any of the other bands that I haven't really talked about but play in, or any of that kind of stuff. Easiest place to follow me, social media, William Covert. I'm on all the stuff. But yeah, no, it's great talking to you, and being able to talk about this stuff, and just what a cool podcast to allow people, kind of talk about kind of that creative spark and where projects started from and where they go to. And, I think I'm always interested in that too. Like the idea of artwork, is it, you put in, the creative side of the art and you end up with the work, or is the art, the work that you're putting into it to make the actual thing. Right.
It's a
And
little bit of both, I would think.
yeah, so I think the conversations of, creative people and how they arrive there, or their views of it, it's just also interesting, especially now in the podcast landscape, the availability to see what all these different people's views are towards art and creativity and the projects they're doing and things like that. So that's all great, and it just is great to be on here as a guest today, and I appreciate you having me.
Well, thank you. So, William dug into a lot of music history. He also dug into a lot of facts that, like I said, when I got the PR kit, some of these terms I've not heard of. I know the music, but I haven't heard of these terms. So it was an education for me. And I think, talking about the creative process and what inspires us, sometimes we don't really think about it, especially when we're younger, that we could walk into a room and there could be a drummer on TV, or we could walk into a room and there could be something else that inspires us. And that inspiration can lead us on a path, on a journey that, there's no telling where it might go. And when you look at the bigger picture, having a teacher that sees the talent and reaches out to the parent, and then the parents actually say, yeah, okay, we're gonna help go along with this. We're gonna help inspire you. We're gonna help continue this dream and this process. That's a gift in itself, because there's a lot of parents that would not do that, especially when it came to drums. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I would sit there when, Mardi Gras parades, and yes, it was loud and it bothered me. But in the same instant, I wanted to play drums so bad. I would take the pots and pans and I would beat on them and everything. But no, I never got a drum kit. And in fact, I didn't get a bass guitar until I was a senior in high school, and I was 17, and I had a friend who had a bass. And the first time I brought home a bass, I brought the bass home, and I told my mom I borrowed it. So after I graduated from high school, I picked up a bass. I bought a bass, got a really good deal on it. And because I knew my mom would frown upon it, said it was the guy's bass again. And I'm not sure my mom ever really knew that it was my bass. I think she figured Jimmy gave it to me, but he didn't. I had actually bought it. So when you look at look at a parent being supportive, it's a gift. It really is. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, because not everybody's got the parents that'll sit there and go, you can do this. We're proud of you. Sometimes it's just the opposite. But I think when you have a gift and you have inspiration, you have to go for it. Recently, I was talking to my dad, and he's like, well, I'm not creative. And I'm thinking to myself, I remember being a kid and my dad playing the organ. And he played the organ when he was younger, and he was phenomenal at it. But yet, at 77 years old, he's sitting there saying, well, I was never creative. You were. You just decided not to be after a certain point. And I think that's what people miss about creativity. They don't really look back at their childhood sometimes, or they think creativity is got to be something in the creative arts. The other thing about my dad was a mechanic and he would know about timing and he would know about all these little things and he knew how to fix things. That's still creative because you're using your mind. You're creatively thinking of a way to solve a problem. And so sometimes creativity can is not necessarily black and white. Sometimes creativity can be other avenues such as figuring problems out, solving problems. And yes, you're using your mind in a different way, but you still have to be creative. Look at the kid who can solve a math problem without working it out. So, on that note, I'm going to wrap this up for a short amount. I'd like to thank Fast Susie for the intro and outro music, which is also a Chicago band or was a Chicago band. And I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in. And I'd like to thank William for coming on. And whenever you're listening, morning, noon, or night, I thank you so very much. And I'll catch you next time, guys. Bye.